No, I'm so happy. I'm so happy this has worked out for you. And I got a question I've been dying to ask. I've been dying to ask this question. Um, and it just because of your name. What role did Saint Robert Bellarmine play in your conversion?
Oh, yes.
Oh yes.
So I started with getting On the Roman Pontiff, books 1 and 2, translated by Ryan Grant.
It's about
And
4 feet away from me. Yeah.
and it was just completely excellent to me because he just so greatly lays out um, even the arguments, like, for example, when I started my inquiries into at the very beginning, and I was talking about how I was reading the Shaft books, like St. John Chrysostom. I remember St. John Chrysostom talking about the prerogatives of St. Peter, and he was saying how he even defended St. Peter against those who would say that St. James was greater than he was because he was the Bishop of Jerusalem. And he said that, while yes, Saint James judged over Jerusalem, he says, I would argue that Saint Peter was the great teacher of the whole world. And I remember that really standing out to me. And this was when he was preaching his homily on Jesus questioning Peter at the end of John with, "Do you love me more than these and feed my lambs?" Uh, and do remember that sticking out to me, like, man, he really puts an emphasis on Peter being the leader of the band, uh, the chief of the apostles, the teacher of the whole world. And uh, St. Robert Bellarmine lays out how that would logically entail the Roman pontiff being the great teacher of the whole world today, if you follow the concept of apostolic succession. Because he demonstrates, yes, Peter's final see was at Rome. He seems to have presided over Rome at the end of his life. Um, so I do think that St. Robert Bellarmine's, and then also on top of that, uh, the fact that he responds to all of these little arguments that you hear from not just Protestant but Eastern Orthodox apologists today. Uh, because it seems to me like a lot of Eastern Orthodox apologists are parroting what the Protestant apologists of the 17th and 16th centuries were saying. And
Yep.
and
Yep.
I think
In Jay Dyer's video, he's like, in his 10 reasons why I'm not Catholic. It's like, well, if you want to learn about the papacy, you can read Welton's book or Papalism by Denny. I'm sorry, he's not Orthodox, Dyer. What are you doing trying to market Protestant material, you know?
right, yeah. Um, no, but it's one of those things where I don't think a lot of the Eastern Orthodox don't think. Now, some do. I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of these young former Protestant converts to Orthodoxy don't realize that they're just bringing their Protestant views into Orthodoxy and believing that they can shape Orthodoxy into what they want it to be. But
Yeah, it turned it into like a sacramental Protestantism. Yeah.
right,
Um
yeah. Oh, I do agree with Elijah, though, that Bellarmine was incorrect on Pope Honorius. To me, it seems like Pope Honorius was guilty of heresy. Um, and that is essentially Bellarmine's argument that it's a questionable passage. So, but no,
yeah.
oh, did you have something?
Well, I'm just going to say, like, the stuff with Saint Robert Bellarmine. I mean, yes, he can be used against the Orthodox, but his primary target is the Protestants. And like, it's like he's read every single writing a Protestant has written. Like, he's read Luther, Melanchthon, Calvin, Chemnitz. He's read them all. And in fact, I just want to show you, to give everyone an example who because there's probably people here who haven't read St. Robert Bellarmine. I'm going to show you what he does. On this paper, you see Luther, Melanchthon, Calvin, Chemnitz, and Peter Vermigli, or as he calls him, Peter the False Martyr. You know what he does to these guys and their arguments? Boom, boom. That's what he does. Over. It's almost cheating that we have St. Robert Bellarmine on our side. It's almost like cheating. It's like we are playing a game and we type in the code for invincibility, and you're just fighting against a normal character. I'm trying to make an analogy, but it's not really working. But you know what I mean. It's like unfair that we have him on our side. Like, it's game over. It's game over. I mean, like, it's sad that it's only been translated into English recently.
No, definitely. I mean, I think there's some English translations, but overall, it's like 1700, like really old English translations of Bellarmine that are hardly readable, or, readable today. But no, but with Ryan Grant's translations, that was hugely influential to me, because it was like, oh wow, all of these, because I started hearing a lot of the anti-Catholic Eastern Orthodox arguments that these guys were bringing up, and St. Robert Bellarmine just seemed to respond to all of them. It was mind blowing to me reading St. Robert Bellarmine and realizing that the arguments haven't even changed after all of these centuries. The arguments haven't changed, but and yet now we have St. Robert Bellarmine, who excellently responds to everything. Antichrist is a fantastic book.
This is his book on the councils. This is his book on the Antichrist. This is his book. I've not read this one yet. This is his book on the sacraments. So, Dr. Ortland, I know you've been doing a lot of sacrament stuff lately, but be lucky I haven't read that book yet, because once I do, someone's going down. Okay, I'm just being it. But anyway, no, seriously, he just takes all those people, like he takes all those people and just wrecks them. Like, he ruins them. Like, John Calvin is done, Chemnitz is done, Melanchthon, Luther, all those people. It's now Paul said, "You raise one Bellarmine, I'll raise a Richard Field." I don't know who that is. I'm gonna guess an Anglican. I'm also not the first Orthodox to read, and one Orthodox priest or bishop in Venice hundreds of years had Bellarmine's books in his library. Pretty epic. Does Bellarmine hold that the Antichrist will be a false Jewish Messiah?
Yes.
John, you want to? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, he does. He believes that, because he argues against. It's funny because the Sedevacantists will often appeal to Bellarmine as a source for their beliefs, yet Bellarmine completely contradicts everything they say about what the end times will look like. He does not believe that the Antichrist will infiltrate the church. He believes that the Antichrist will rebuild a third temple in Jerusalem. The Antichrist will be a Jewish Messiah who reigns for 3.5 years, and this Antichrist will explicitly reject Christ. He will not believe that Christ is a Messiah, and he argues that from, I believe, is it 2 Thessalonians, where St. Paul says, "Who is that man who rejects that Jesus is the Christ, but Antichrist?" And so he says, since the Pope accepts that Jesus is the Christ, he cannot be the Antichrist for that reason, and thus the same could be.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and thus the same could be said about the post-conciliar popes, such as John Paul II, Francis, and all them. They can't be Antichrist because they confess that Jesus is the Christ. But
and keep in mind, in 2 Thessalonians, I think he declares himself to be God, right? No,
Yes.
no popes have ever done that.
Yes, that's
No,
one of the things Bellarmine says, is that he will demand worship of himself. So
yeah, and it's so ridiculous. It's like the Antichrist, when you read it, is not a Christian or doesn't even claim to be a Christian. He denies Jesus as a Christ. He calls himself God. On the Marks of the Church was a game changer for me. I do want to say something about that book, and then I'll hand it off to you. That book is so good. Like, it's so small. It's only like 120 pages. You can read through that in one sitting, and not a very long sitting. But in so little, he packs so much. He packs so much, and like it's ownage. It's ruining all those heretics I just named. I'm not even going to name them anymore. But like it just, oh man, it's like that's a book I would recommend to anyone. I've got a friend of mine actually who's actually a member of the Orthodox Church, ironically, and is a raging feminist, but that's beside the point, you know. Interesting character. You know, a friend of mine. She's awesome. But she has a goal. She's trying to read a whole bunch of books by the end of the year, or else she'll read um, a book by Saint Robert Bellarmine. And then I'm like, yeah, well, I'll tell you which one to read, you know. And I was gonna recommend On the Marks of the Church, because so much in so little. It's just like it ruins its opponents. You know, it's over. It's over for Luther, Chemnitz, Calvin, all these people who Bellarmine just owns. All right, I'll let you say something about this book.
actually, admittedly, I haven't read this one. So
Oh,
I do have it. I own it, and I have not read it yet. So
oh, so much in so little. That's what you'll get. Is there anything more about Saint Robert Bellarmine before you want to move on?
I'm trying to think if, you know, I think one of the things that really helped me with reading St. Robert Bellarmine was that he is a brilliant catechist. And I'm not just talking about his catechism, which I still need to read as well, but I mean, I've learned so much from reading him. It's like I admittedly I wish that the catechism of the Catholic Church was as clear and concise as Bellarmine was, but
I love that catechism. I love that catechism. It's just so clear to the point, and it's easy to under. That's another thing. It's not like we're trying to read these high level scholastic tracts like Christian Wagner does. You know, Bellarmine is really easy to understand.
mhm.
Like someone who is 12 years old can understand the stuff. It's just beautiful. Now, the other Paul says, my favorite Bellarmine text is when he wrote, "It's Beller time," and then made the same argument against
Oh.
scriptural sufficiency as the Gnostics and cited some Second Corinthians passages for it. It's Beller time.
Now, I will say, admittedly, I do think that Bellarmine did hold that position that not every doctrine needed to be found in Scripture.
Oh,
Now,
oh,
most
he was
people,
partly,
yeah, he was like partly
partly.
Scripture, partly
Okay.
tradition. But granted, that wasn't even I don't believe it was a very popular tradition from the fathers at Trent. So, because there are certain fathers at the Council of Trent who said everything you can find in the Catholic Church is explicitly or implicitly found in Scripture. So,
Yeah. Well, he does give a ton of scriptural arguments for everything he does. And like, oh man, just his book on the Eucharist, where it's basically a polemic against Calvin and Chemnitz. It just basically it's kind of like this, boom, boom. You know, it's over. All right, I'm going to
the other
stop that.
Paul wrecked.
Oh, all right, good times. Are there any questions for John?